Again, we are here doing our Hebrew syntax, and so we've taken our quiz, and so we will pull out Arnold and Choi, and we will turn to page 36 in our textbook, and talk about verbs. At any time while you're watching this video, you can put it on pause and go retrieve your book if you need to. All right, so page 36, verbs. Biblical Hebrew has no tenses in the strict sense of the term. By this statement, we mean that Hebrew does not locate an action or state in time by means of specific morphology. How do you unpack that statement?
I leave it alone.
What does that mean?
The form of the word won't necessarily tell you when the action occurred.
Okay, the form of the word will not necessarily tell you when the action occurred. Yeah, okay, that's pretty close. Of course, this does not mean that Hebrew fails to express time relations entirely, only that it does so through a variety of syntactical and contextual features, rather than through verbal inflections or grammatically realized tenses, which is really saying the same thing again, and kind of what you said. In language study now, with both Greek and Hebrew, there is a movement away from the idea of tenses. In Greek, we're told that Greek verbs, by some people, we're told that Greek verbs only ever have aspect and not tense, even in the indicative. I know for sure that it's been taken too far in terms with respect to Greek. I know that. I think so. And I suspicion it might have been taken too far with respect to Hebrew. But and part of the reason I chose this book for us to go through, in contrast to the beginning grammar we had. You didn't hear this in the beginning grammar. So the beginning grammar sticks more with the older way of looking at Hebrew and tenses and things. This goes with the newer way of looking at tenses. So we get both. There's probably something to be said from the newer way. But I have a feeling that the new way today is not going to be where we end up in a little while. I just have that feeling. Linguistics is really good, but sometimes I think that linguistics falls into the same kind of problem that academics in general can fall into. And that is that sometimes people are not just motivated by the pursuit of truth, they're motivated by the pursuit of getting a job or publishing something. And I'm not saying that people who are writing about biblical Hebrew are in that category, not at all. But we'll have to see how scholarship takes this in the next few years, I think. One of the things, though, that I think is forgotten in discussions like this is that language does not ever develop logically consistently. I mean, there are logical principles that support a language. There's a sense in which language is essentially a logical thing. But there's also another sense in which language is inherently an illogical thing. Because that's the way people are. Language is very personal. Because it is used by persons, but it also reflects who a person is, and it reflects human nature to a large degree. So, human beings are both logical and illogical, aren't they? So language is both logical and illogical. And sometimes I think what is forgotten in these discussions of grammar is that you can come up with all the logical principles that you want to, but the language is, by definition, not always going to follow them. Because languages always develop in illogical directions. Because that's the way people are. You understand what I'm saying? I think it's valid to look for the logical principle. But you also have to keep in mind that language is going to bust out of logic. When you think about the definition of a word, maybe you can't always find it, but generally I think you can find the core meaning of a word and see how the other meanings develop from that core meaning. The word in English to run. It seems to me that something close to the core meaning of it is a person or an animal actually running. And various other meanings develop from that as it's applied to contexts other than a person or an animal moving quickly on their feet. You know, an engine runs. Well, you can see kind of a logical correspondence between an engine running and an animal running. You know, or a run in your nylons. You know, it's moving up, right? And so you can see how that word develops from what I would think would be a core meaning, and that develops into a range of meaning. But does that mean that the word run could never be used in a way that doesn't logically develop from that? Or if we say that we can see how it could logically develop, maybe it's not how it did develop. See? So when it comes to verbs, we cannot expect, in fact we can expect to find that the verbs in Hebrew are not always going to work in a way that's perfectly consistently logical. And in fact, if we could develop a logical framework that explained the use of every verb in biblical Hebrew, you'd probably say right off the bat, that can't be right because language has got to have some illogic in it. Right? So we have to keep that in mind. Is it reasonable to say that within the forms of the verb tenses, there is no, within the forms of the verbs themselves, there is no tense indication? I think at best, yes and no. Because statistically, it has to be that certain verb forms are going to be used more because there's going to be more fitting in most contexts for certain tenses. And what about when you get to the preterite? I think you could probably demonstrate that the preterite, above consecutive or conversive, is probably, the vast majority of cases, or at least the majority of cases, a reference to a past tense. So even if the core meaning of the morphology doesn't include tense, it's probably going to turn out that in practice, one form is going to be used for a certain tense more than another. Not accidentally, because it fits better, right? So maybe it's right to say that there isn't tense connected to verb forms, time of action. But it might be an overstatement to completely separate the two. It says, rather than a morphologically precise tense system, and there's some qualifiers there, a morphologically precise tense system. That's true, right? There's in Hebrew, talk about verbs. At any time while you're watching this video, you can put it on pause and go retrieve your book if you need to. All right, so page 36, verbs. Biblical Hebrew in the strict sense of the term. Verbs, there is a fair amount of fluidity. Absolutely. Hebrew uses an aspect system to indicate first the contour of a situation in time, and second, the type of action. So we're going to be using some German words here in a minute. The first grammatical category, aspect, identifies the action as either undefined or progressive, perfect or imperfect. So the undefined is going to be something like the aorist tense in Greek. And the progressive is going to be something like the present derivative kind of idea in Greek. So the perfect tense is going to be undefined, and the imperfect is going to be progressive. When I say perfect tense, imperfect tense, I'm using the word tense. That's the old system, right? We just have to realize what we mean by that.
I think you just need to put air quotes over it, and it'll be fine.
Tense.
Yeah.
It makes me
Now I
tense.
understand.
All right, the second category, Aktiensart, I got a German term there, refers to the type of action with regard to voice, fientivity, I think that's probably not how you pronounce that, transitivity, causation, and various reflexive actions. The latter, Aktiensart, is marked by verbal stems, the former aspect by a verbal conjugation. So stems such as cal, pl, hifil, etc. And verbal conjugations such as perfect or imperfect. Okay? So that's where we're coming from in this book, from the standpoint of verbs. If not authors, editors need to know their audience and not talk so far above their audience. Because if they're talking about country pastors, admittedly who are rednecks but teaching Hebrew, they're definitely talking about seminary students. So, be that as it may, we'll get through this in the best way possible. All right. Well, we'll be able to do this. We'll do this. We just have to work to find him defining himself as much as he does, and that's all.
There is a glossary in the back which is a little helpful.
Good
It
job.
helped me understand.
My wife, I have to give all credit to her and God.
See, there you go. Okay.
Well, not in that order.
Let's test it out.
He doesn't give any pronunciations on these, so.
I know.
I couldn't figure out what patency nuance was.
Yeah. Okay, what page is the glossary on?
Around the 199, 198,
Okay, good.
197.
I figured it was the opposite of agency nuance.
I do too, but I have no agency.
I figured it had something
All right.
to do with being patient.
I figured doctor operates on a patient, so the verb operates on the patient.
That's kind of a good way to look at it. Fientive, a verb that describes an action or change of state. Well, that's what he says. That's what he says in that paragraph. So,
Yeah.
All right. So stem. In general, the Cal and Nipal have no element of causation in their predication.
I wonder what he means by causation.
We'll get into that.
You can figure that one out.
In distinction to the other stems, the PL, PUAL, and HIT-PAL have causation with a patiency nuance, passiveness of the object, you might say. And the Hifil and Hafil, represent causation notion with an agency nuance. An active object. The object is doing some acting as opposed to being acted on.
I hang that paragraph up on my fridge. It's pretty meaningful.
That's pretty good. That's something to meditate on. All right, we're on page 37. The Cal or G stem. The Cal
That's from the
is the simple active stem.
grunt stem,
The grunt, yeah. All right.
which means basic stem German.
The voice of the primary subject is active. And we'll look at the vertical axis in a moment, the appendices. Since there is no element of causation, the Cal has no secondary subject. The first column of the horizontal axis of appendix 2. Hence, the term simple. Now, where does the G stem come from? Like you said,
German.
Grundstamm.
Also known as basic stem.
So
That's
it's just out of Berlin.
The verbal stems in other Semitic languages have different names. It makes it difficult to study them together.
All right, the G stem. All right, so there are a couple of different uses of the cal stem. The feyentive, and he tells us this describes action, motion, or change of state. Since the term active is this footnote, since the term active is regularly used to denote voice, the term feyentive is used to describe this type of action. So there you go.
There we go. Oh, we're changing state.
Not yet.
Oh.
No, this is action right here. Okay. So you can see the examples here, and that's pretty straightforward. All right. Now we have stative, describes a state or quality of the subject. English translations often make no distinction between stative verbs and predicate adjectives. So Pharaoh's heart was heavy. And even as he does this stuff, you can see there's a lot of overlap. Right? So now the PL is supposed to cause something to be in a certain state. But here the cal is describing a state. Right. So Pharaoh's heart was heavy, for example. All right. The Nifal stem, the N stem, which is kind of cool because N is reminiscent of the term Nifal, isn't it? The simple middle passive and simple reflexive stem. So, from our study of Greek, if you studied Greek before, you know the terms middle and passive, and you know the terms reflexive as well. All right, so the voice of the primary subject is middle passive or reflexive. So passive, that's fairly obvious. Frequently the passive of the cal. This is its simplest meaning, though not necessarily its primary one. So kavar, to bury, becomes to be buried. Or okol, to eat, becomes to be eaten. All right. This paragraph at the bottom of page 39 is interesting. Hebrew's use of the nifal is an incomplete passive. The passive in English is a construction, not a category or verbal meaning. Thus, the students read the lesson has a passive construct. The lesson was read by the students. Once when I used Getchus's grammar and workbook to teach Greek, one of the big things he did was have you do passive transforms in Greek. You take an active Greek sentence and turn it into a passive transform. So when you do that, if you look at this sentence, the students read the lessons. For the lesson, you have to take the direct object and make it the subject, and you have to take the subject, and in Greek you would probably use hupa with the ablative case to make it by something, right? And then turn the verb to a passive. So the lesson was read by the students. By the complete passive, we mean the same transformation. By the incomplete, we mean the same transformation minus the agent. So you would just say the lesson was read. You leave off by the students. And so the speaker is not concerned with specifying the agent of the action. All Hebrew passages belong to this category. Constructions with a specific agent are virtually non-existent. He does give you some examples of them in the Old Testament. But most of the time, you do not find the by whatever in the Hebrew construction. So that's why he called it incomplete. All right, middle. In the middle, the subject is more intensely involved in the action somehow. So verbs that are normally used in the passive constructions may be used in a quasi-active sense, but with the object as the subject of the verb. Unlike the incomplete passive, middle verbs are active in form, but the meaning is in a sense reversed. The object of the verb has become the subject of the middle verb. So the heavens opened. So what God opened? The heavens. The heavens opened themselves. I mean, maybe something opened the heavens, but the heavens opened, right? Heavens is the subject of the sentence, and it's also what God opened. Okay. Nifal. Now, reflexive, action for or concerning oneself. What's the difference between the terms reflexive and reciprocal? Reflexive is I do something for or concerning myself. That's reflexive. Reciprocal means I'm doing something with someone. Okay? And you can see examples of that. I don't think that's very difficult to understand. And stative, again, describes the state of the subject produced by the verbal action. On the Sabbath day, the gate shall be open, or do not be grieved. Passive, right? But it shows a state. All right. PL. PL is the D stem. The PL is the causative with patiency nuance. Active. It's active, but it has patiency nuance. The most elusive of the Hebrew stems. Probably because we use terms like patiency nuance. One leading scholar recently signaled a warning about the futility of searching for a unifying central understanding of the stem's use. It's pointless to try to find a single explanation to account for all of the transformative power of the D stem. It is simply a form.
That's encouraging.
Yeah. Well, people used it the way they wanted to, I guess.
So will I.
As with all of language. No, you can't. It's not your language. You can't do that.
Man spoke what was right in his own eyes.
All right. He talks about the traditional understanding of the PO as intensive.
And then he goes on to say, but that's not good.
No, but they're looking at it as causing a state. Okay? Rather than causing a process, the patiency part means it's causing a state. Okay? So, some of the examples of the PL on page 44. Factative. Let's see if we get it in the. Let's see what he says about factative in the glossary. A verbal form that expresses the causing of a state. All right. So factative makes transitive verbs. Makes transitive many verbs that are intransitive in the cal. By transitivizing verbs that are cal and transitive, the PL factative.
He just made a word.
Yeah. Denotes
He just verbed a word.
The PL factative denotes a cause producing a state. So there's the definition of factative. All right. Factative verbs indicate a cause producing a state, rather than a cause producing an action, and that's Hiphil. So this would be a good thing to understand, though, in terms of the distinction between the PL and the Hiphil.
I just looked in the back to see if I could better understand transitive, and he says, a fientive verb with an identified direct object. So now I have to make sure I know what fientive means again. He uses the big words to define the other big words. It makes it really hard.
Fientive, he says, a verb that becomes transitive with an identified direct object.
Are you joking me?
Yeah, I am.
Fientive describes action, motion, or change of state. Let's see you work this stuff into your sermon.
I don't think I'll ever preach again.
All right.
You can say that the goal of preaching is fientive, right?
Yeah,
see fientivity.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. Denominative.